It's green, so
Alrighty, I'll give you co-host privileges. Thank you
uh,
for reminding me. 1 minute. I gotta do it with my other account. Okay, co-host. There we go. Now co-host.
okay, now I want to go to energy enablement has great stuff on it. Let's see. Oh, that's because I moved around a bit. Let's see.
Yeah,
I don't know what that is. I don't know what to share. Let's see. Let's try sharing this one, but I'll go to
sure.
I'll
You're
put
sharing your whole screen rather than a particular application.
let's
Yep.
see. All right, now I'm gonna put a email here. That's an email. And then I'll go to the email that I recently got one of the let's see. Um, one person said they wanted to participate, and that was
Sure.
that'll be the here's my this will actually have the whole content. So if you can see, can you guys see? Okay,
Yes.
all right. So the original email going back to when I sent it on Sunday made reference to the email that I got from Dave Roberts. Dave Roberts is a make sure it's as big as possible. Is a self-styled host who finds his own content and
Sure.
interviews with people, and he's very interested in energy and climate. So he's like us in a sense, and he looked.
Welcome, Dave Stets, as well, for joining.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I was just letting you know that Dave Stets joined as well.
And Dave joined us. Okay, hi
Yep.
Dave. All right, so Dave Roberts has this video, an audio webinar he does every week. And this particular week, his host was a woman named Data Gruener. And Could be pronounced Greener, but I think one of the rabbis of Washington some decades ago was named Gruener. So I figured she might be related to him. Anyway, Dakota is a woman. And anyway, so Dave Robert interviews her, um, and a lot of things are said that we should be talking about. Her basic idea is maybe we should be blocking the sun, and maybe the best way to do it is with sulfur dioxide. So a lot of issues came up in the conversation. At the end, you're not convinced, but you're certainly, I think, stimulated. And the stuff that we talked about in this, that he talked about, extends meetings that actually this forum, ProRate Energy, um, dealt with when Paul Washington hosted it. Paul Washington is one of our regular members of ProRate Energy Group, and and he is a PhD geologist and helped us understand what the problems are and the solutions. And we talked about extensively which type of aerosol you might want to use and the good and bad things about it. So we have a background in this subject that we talked about before. I think around 3 months ago, 4 months ago. It was certainly no earlier than, no more recently than November of last year. Anyway, so I thought it was very interesting. I sent this on Friday. I looked at it subsequently, and I thought this might be the best thing to talk about tonight. So I gave this introduction. I'm going to read to you from the introduction I read that I sent out on Sunday around 11 o'clock, just a few days ago, but about 2 days
10
ago.
o'clock. Yeah.
And so I'm very excited about this topic, much more than the few we had on this topic last year, because it's very bolstered by Friday's Volts reporting, where in the guest expert sites, published science that asserts. And it turns out what she asserted is disputed by um, Paul Washington, who was a geologist on our team. And I'm going to tell you what she says and what Paul Washington disputes. The first thing is that there is a 100-to-1 projected death benefit, namely, you might have to kill one person to save 100. Now that whether or not you like the idea of killing one person to save 100 is very much in line with what I said. This conversation might be mostly about ethics. Second one is that, and Paul does not dispute the second one, although the proposed sulfur dioxide injection into the atmosphere is toxic to all life. This experiment is not novel to Earth science. Hundreds of volcanoes have dosed our planet in similar ways in the relatively recent past. I'm talking about like 10 or 20,000 years. And many of these have caused extended many-month-long winters. So no one denies that SO2 injection cooled the planet. SO2 is already in the troposphere now, roughly 800 million tons, 80 million tons, sorry. And they're put largely by the same processes that grossly raise the carbon dioxide concentration, namely burning fossil fuels, which fortunately also contain sulfur. And so you don't just get carbon dioxide, you also get sulfur dioxide. And because these things are generated at the bottom of the troposphere, namely the bottom of the troposphere is the surface of the Earth, most of it gets deposited there. And then another fact, which is pretty undisputed, is that all SO2, no matter where placed in the atmosphere, naturally falls out with a preset half-life. So half-life means you lose half, say, in 2 years or 5 years, and then the remaining you lose in the next 2 years. Assuming it all falls out in a way, which means that no matter how much SO2 is in there, if we wait long enough, it'll all come out. And so if we were to look at where we were before the Industrial Revolution around 200 years ago, there would have been a very, very much smaller amount of SO2, just like there's less CO2. The fifth issue, I think, is disputable, that I asserted. It is asserted by Dakota, but whether it's true is dubious. But nevertheless, she said that, yes, if you add SO2 to more SO2 to the atmosphere, it would decrease the photovoltaic panel effectiveness, but she said only by 1/30. That is not, Paul Washington doesn't agree with that. And also, it only take 20 million tons of extra SO2, and instead placed in the next higher layer, the stratosphere, to completely balance Earth's temperature to what it was more than 80 or 90 years ago. 89, I don't know why it's 89. I was trying to change it from 80 to 90, but it doesn't make a difference. So, about a century ago, it was a lot cooler. And to get there, all we need to do is add 20 million tons of extra SO2. And I'll explain how she said to do it. And I think Paul will probably find a little bit a challenge with this. But the biggest challenge he has is the first one. There is a 100-to-1 projected avoided death benefit. Now, I said this can be done fast enough to save New Orleans. I am very much novice. I do not really know how long it would take. But I will point out that what Dakota said is that the stratosphere is not homogeneously the same height. So let's spend a moment talking about where the stratosphere is. But I'll just finish the comment. So the idea of killing one person to save 100 is not kosher ethics. And I have Brendan here will help us talk about what that means, kosher ethics. But there are philosophers who promote utilitarianism, which is like John Stuart Mill, I think, was the promoter of that. And it basically says, if you have a choice between killing 1 and 100, and you don't have to choose, but if you do choose, you should choose.
I mean, if it's all right, Myron, I'll summarize utilitarianism.
Okay.
So it was originally, came up with by Jeremy Bentham, who's a friend of Mill. But John Stuart Mill in 1860, I believe, came out with a book called Utilitarianism. And there's really three components to utilitarianism. It's consequentialist, which means when evaluating whether an action is morally right or wrong, the resulting consequences are all that matter in evaluating whether an action is morally permissible or impermissible. Besides being consequentialist, it's hedonistic. It said that for Jeremy Bentham, the original thing says, whatever action produces the great amount of happiness over unhappiness matters. Mill refined that and said, whatever produces the most amount of pleasure over pain. And he can take into account, let's say, higher order sorts of pleasures and not just bestial ones or lower order ones, right? Like, long-term accomplishments, those sorts of things. So it isn't just about necessarily short-term gratification. So it's consequentialist, it's hedonistic, and the third component is it's egalitarian. So all sentient life, which is the ability to feel pleasure and pain, is morally relevant, right? So when doing a calculation, when comparing two different actions, let's say, he had these units called utils, and he would say you calculate the utils of pleasure and pain in each of the actions, taking into account everyone's interests, and then that would let you know when weighing what you ought to do. So in a famous thought experiment of the trolley experiment, if there's three people on one side and one person on the other, and you have to choose which way the out of control trolley is going to go down, which track it's going to go down. Let's say you're a passenger and you're at the engineer's passed out or something, and you're there at the front. Then you would always, it'd be morally correct for a utilitarian to always choose the one, maybe over the other,
Or the one that kills fewer people.
even in an impartial way, like even if you know the one person, right?
Right.
So if it's Anyway, so that's my summary of utilitarianism for those that a
Yeah,
lot of
I
people
think
think it
that,
has to do with utility, but only in ethics, only in a particular sense.
okay, so that's sort of a ethical dilemma maybe that we're in. It isn't obvious we're even in that, but that's what I think superficially it seems to be. So anyway, if you actually listen to the thing that Dave Roberts, the host of Votes, when he's listening to Dakota, Dakota explains that to get the sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere is not as hard as you might think. So let's take a little bit look at what the atmosphere is. And I misspelled atmosphere here, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. So I quoted this from AI, and there really are many layers to the atmosphere, but the only two that are relevant to this discussion are the two lower layers, lowest layers. The troposphere is where we live, namely, it's near the surface up to 8 to 15 kilometers. You say, well, is it 8 or is it 15? And the answer is depending upon where you are. If you're near the North Pole or South Pole, it's 8. If you're near the equator, it's 15. So, and that's relevant because to get it in the stratosphere, you have to put it in most likely with an airplane. And there are airplanes that travel over 8 miles high in the transatlantic, but they don't go 15 kilometers high. So you would put it in the northern hemisphere over, say, 45-degree latitude, and the southern hemisphere below the 45-degree latitude in the south, and it would automatically migrate toward the equator. But it doesn't pass, she said, it doesn't pass through the equator. It would go only stay in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. The stratosphere is the atmosphere above the troposphere. And again, it ranges from 8 to 15 miles at the bottom end and much higher. We don't care about much higher because we can't get it that high. Anyway, so this is what we're talking about, putting it in the stratosphere. As I said earlier, it's pretty well established science that there is a lot of SO2 already in the troposphere, but very little in the stratosphere. And she's suggesting we should put it in the stratosphere. So I sent this out, and less than a half a day later, I got 3 emails. So the first one that I'm going to mention is from my first cousin, Diana Silverman, who actually lives in Düsseldorf. And she spent most of the last 2 decades leading pharmaceutical trials to find out whether or not they're safe enough and produce enough benefit compared to risk to put in the marketplace. So she really knows this stuff, and she thinks it's a terrible idea that we should do it. I don't need to rephrase it here, but she thinks it's not. We don't run a world by utilitarian ethics. So anyway, this is what she said in other words. And then I wrote back to her, asking her permission if I could forward it. And she said yes. And she said, add the risk to benefit ratio is too high. Namely, if you only save 100 people by killing one, that's too high for the pharmaceutical industry and doesn't justify the benefit, in my opinion. That's interesting. This is a person who worked professionally, working exactly in this field, and she says it doesn't meet the standard. All right. However, she wasn't the only person who commented. I also got a comment from Tor. You might remember Tor that often participates in these. He said, hi, the people of the earth are currently facing a severe famine due in no part to urea that Qatar has now demolished refineries produced. This will be felt most intensely in China and India, which have relatively poor soils. Good luck in getting any of that, any other than intense hostility to diminishing the solar by injecting SO2 in the stratosphere for the next 5 years. I actually spoke to him in the last 2 hours. He called me up and he reiterated that it's definitely an issue of famine. He says there's a severe famine problem on the planet already. Both China and India have relatively poor soil. They depend upon petroleum products coming through the Strait of Hormuz to enrich their soil so they can grow food. And they also would, even if we didn't have the problem with what's going on with Iran and that strait being blocked, they certainly don't want to have less ability to make food. So he would say, no, you can't do this. Even the smallest decrease in being able to make food would be catastrophic to the planet and would be another issue that we would have to consider if we really wanted to promote this and understand all the issues. And then I got an email from Paul. Actually, his email was first. And he had a very negative opinion of Dakota Gruener's comments. First of all, he points out she has no technical expertise in geology, which is what she's talking about. She says she's a typical CEO type, talking about making decisions without understanding the technical aspects of what she's talking about. And even though her background is in health delivery, focus on political and economic issues, but she didn't really add anything to the science of geology, and even chastised Dakota by reference to the experience that he has, because his daughter works for Microsoft, and pointed out the Microsoft team is promoting AI. He doesn't even understand the team. The guy who's promoting it doesn't understand what AI does and how dangerous it is. And she says they're trying to sell something without understanding what they're talking about. And so he thinks this is another example of the same kind of stuff. However, I had another conversation with Paul Washington a couple of hours ago. He told me more about how the science is just not settled. He pointed out, going back to this assertion that I'm talking about now, he said that this is just not known. There are so many things, feedback loops. For example, gave you a simple example. If you increase the reflectivity of the Earth, which is the albedo, then you're going to decrease the amount of heat that reaches the ocean, which means you will decrease the amount of evaporation, because primarily that's where it occurs, which means there'll be less rain, which means anyone living on the western edge of a continent is going to significantly get a lot less rain, and their crops might fail and it'll kill people. That's just one example. No one knows how likely that is or how big the effect is. And that's just one simple effect. There's told me about hundreds of different effects that you would have to know all of them and do a weighted average of them to have an idea of whether that number is correct. This is, in his opinion, almost completely bullshit. And if that's almost completely bullshit, this whole conversation is almost completely bullshit, in my opinion. However, the reason why I don't think it's inappropriate to cancel this meeting is because if you look what Sharon said, and I commented over here, I said when Sharon said, and the reason why Sharon made this list is because honestly, Sharon and I are wondering whether we want to keep living in New Orleans because it's so devastatingly, New Orleans is going to go below sea level or get too hot or whatever. And it's mentioned lots of different places which have this problem. So look at this question. What did AI say about which cities are likely to go down? And it quickly mentions New Orleans as being a place that's in trouble. Actually, I haven't been to this site to see what it says, but there are various cities that it mentions that are in trouble, 10 U.S. cities that could become livable by 2040. And it mentions them, although I'm having trouble scrolling through this. So I'm going to go to a different one of the links that Sharon sent me. And here, try this one, 5 cities. And it says Miami, and then it says, let's see, get to the next one. And then it goes, again, I don't know how to scroll through it quickly, but it mentions Miami, it mentions New Orleans, it mentions Houston, it mentions New York, and even one that isn't on a coast like Phoenix has temperatures over 120 degrees for many, many days on end, which kills people. So all these various things are part of the consequence of climate change. And it seems obvious to me, no matter how well we succeed promoting ProRate, or a dozen other institutions producing similar ways to lower our carbon footprint, the stuff that's already in the atmosphere isn't going out anytime soon. And there's going to be a tremendous amount of destruction on this planet. And it seems to me having it get to do the work, as Paul Washington says, do the work to find out whether or not we really can get this number. Do the work, okay? And once we do that work, and he said it would take at least a decade to do that work, then we would be in a position to make a decision. Right now, we can't make that decision. But it seems to me that sometime soon, whether it's the next 5 years, 10 years, or 50 years, this planet will face this problem and someone will take action. Whether it's some country, thinking they're doing the right thing, or they don't really care about everyone else, they just do it because it doesn't take an international effort to do it. I mean, one country can do it. And I'm not very proud of this country for what it's been doing with its dictatorial president. So I don't think our country is any shining example of doing the right thing. But if he got it in his craw that he wanted to solve this problem and be held the hell with everyone else, he would just do it. And I don't know that I would want him to do it, but I don't think that we should not find out what the probability of the projected effect. So I've said enough to start the conversation. I don't want other.
Sure, I noticed Tor has his hand raised.
Okay.
Uh, I'm going to speak from the geologic point of view that multiple eruptions have confirmed that you put enough sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere that you will chill the planet. You will substantially lower the temperature. That's not in dispute. The second is that it just caused, years without a crop. It blocked enough sunlight to cause crop failures. But that was because there was an eruption and there was a lot of ash particles in it. So you have to go back to when they were burning very high sulfur fuels and the ships, and it lowered the sunlight over the oceans by quite a bit. Now, I have to do some spectral analysis on sulfur dioxide to figure out if the heat went into the oceans or not. Because if it doesn't block the heat into the oceans, it won't matter. I mean, as SI2 has a spectral, and that's where the key analysis has to be. I think it allows heat to radiate in space, but allows light to come in.
I want to reinforce what Tor said. Actually, they accidentally did an experiment. It was not intentional. About 3 or 4 to 5 years ago, an international agency said that ocean-going ships like supertankers have to stop using high sulfur fuel. They made it a law.
Right.
The law passed, and what they found was that it made it cooler. It made it warmer in the oceans because it let in more sunlight. And so they know it has an effect. Whether it's the one you want is a good question, but we know it's effective. So
Well, compared to other options, I mean, the world's going to face a crisis when the seas start to rise. They're going to face a crisis. Maybe then it'll be unilateral. That the United States will just put what was the number they were suggesting? 40 million tons in the stratosphere.
that's where
Because
Dakota said 20 million.
20 million, but you price that at $1,000 a ton, which is air freight rates. I mean, it's reasonable. I mean, that's $20 billion a year.
Well, actually,
Every other.
excuse me, it wouldn't be $20 million a year. It would be $20 million to get it there, and maybe $5 million a year to keep up with the half-life. Because it falls out.
Yeah, a certain amount of comes out of the stratosphere every year.
I think did you say billion or million?
It would be billion. $1,000 a ton is about right for stratospheric dispersion.
If we could lower the temperature of the planet to where it was 100 years ago for $20 billion a year, that's a tremendous deal.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to point out that temperature is fundamentally different than energy.
Right.
You have to lower the energy. If you don't lower the energy level, you're going to lose the poles.
I don't know what you mean, Thor.
Oh, this goes back to my astrophysicist that pointed out energy levels in the Earth. Temperature is not the same as energy because if it rains a lot more where you are very energy rich. If you get a lot of evaporation, you're energy poor. Again, temperature doesn't correlate to that. So I look at that. What the geologists were adamant about is follow the water. And the world is getting wetter because, as you point out, increased evaporation from warmer oceans. And I saw a 6 sigma plume of moisture go into the Sahara a few days ago. There's very likelihood that it will become a semi-tropical or tropical forest, like it has been in geologic past. That alone signifies that we're going back into the Cretaceous geologic period. I mean, we're no longer recognizable weather patterns to anything that was in the Pleistocene or Pliocene, the Holocene. All those are the most recent ages, and since we're way past all of those models. So yeah, you dump a lot of 20 billion, and then given that half the world's real estate by value is within the first 10 feet of development of the sea level rise, I mean, people are going to be looking for solutions. And maybe they'll just fill up the atmosphere with sulfur dioxide and say the hell with it.
Let me reiterate what Tor said, because I think as I was hearing it, part of what he said didn't get through the internet. As there is on the order of $200 or $300 trillion of real estate that is at risk with the 10-meter rise on the whole planet. That amount of real estate demands, the people who own it will demand something be done to protect their interests. And be the hell with the people who are poor who can't contribute. That kind of thing will play out, in my opinion. I'm not saying I think the rich people should fuck the poor people, but in this particular case, everyone's losing, not everyone in the same amount. Some people are losing a lot worse than others, but it's not, in my opinion, something like this is going to happen because it is a solution. It is fraught with difficulties. We do not know the ratio of the good and the bad. And until you know it, you can't even do utilitarian ethics. But even so, it's utilitarian ethics, which allows this conversation to be vaguely coherent, vaguely fair, and something like that. I don't think it's all obvious that this is fair, but I do think it's a real issue. I hope someone else would jump in like Dave Stetz or Dr. Saeed and give an opinion, even if it's half-baked, so we can all realize we're all in the same boat. Dr. Saeed?
I'll just jump in to say, rather than fairness, it might be impartial is what they would really, emphasize. So it's impartial and take into account all lives on the planet mattering. That's
right. But anyone else want to jump in? You want to say something?
I sent you an interesting article by Princeton University Press, John Tarek, I think, but it's a really cute title for his paper. It's called "Should Numbers Count?" Is the title for his paper. But I guess what I'm wondering, because you're focused on utilitarian versus Kantian ethics and that sort of thing, is how do you think those theories would practically inform whether or not to even do this practice? So is the idea that there's going to be short-term suffering because of the implementation of SO2, sulfur dioxide?
I don't think it's at all obvious that I don't know. I'm not a geologist. I don't think it's at all obvious that there's going to be short-term suffering that exceeds the benefit. But what do you say, Tor?
Tor, yeah.
I'm going to point out there's going to be massive suffering either way. I really looked at it and thought about it and saying, is anybody going to notice? Because if you're facing wipeout of half the real estate by value, you're facing famines around the world, you're facing upheaval like that. What's a little sulfur dioxide and chilling the weather going to do?
You might be hastening deaths versus a slower decline of quality of life.
Dan, you want to say something? I think Dan wants to say something.
My only thought was when Myron was talking about governments and countries, an individual could do this as well.
That's right.
Doesn't have to be voted on, doesn't have to be consensus. An individual could do it. So
absolutely.
Myron, we're all counting on you.
Some individual actors have more than the GDP of certain countries.
I'm not saying I am unequivocally for this. I just think it's important to know that it's on the table and there's someone who's going to think about it and someone who's going to do it. Unfortunately, maybe it's unfortunate. I don't know. But looks to me like it has to happen. And it isn't a question whether it's going to happen. It's going to happen because somebody has a $10 trillion office building 5 feet above sea level who's going to say, this is a deal. I'll save my building for pennies on a dollar. Somebody's going to do this. And the question is going to happen tomorrow, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, whatever. If it happens in the next 5 years, it could save New Orleans. I don't know whether
I,
you
see-
feel
I
good
see
about
Tor,
it.
Tor getting sworn into.
Yeah, go ahead, Tor. What do you say?
I just want to point out it will not happen in the U.S.
Why do you say that?
Regulation to the extreme, the naivety of the public. However, if we're just talking about the amount of money in an international organization, you pick any country that's got basically a runway and do it from there.
All you need is a runway and an airplane to fly. You know, if it can fly from New Orleans to Amsterdam, which usually means going over the North Pole or close to it, you can do it.
Oh,
And if you
no,
got a
you
pocket
spread
like
the
Elon
sulfur
Musk, you
dioxide
can
around
do
the
it.
equator.
What'd you say?
You spread the sulfur dioxide around the equator.
We didn't hear you talk. Say it again.
It just lagged a little bit.
You would be flying in stratospheric planes, which a commercial cargo jet is fully capable of, and you'd be flying
Right.
in around the 45,000 feet range. But around the equator is where it's
Right.
most effective. That's why Canberra in Indonesia had such an effect on the climate.
That's a good point.
Pinatubo, that was in the Philippines.
Was that south of the 45th latitude?
No, one's in Indonesia, one's in the Philippines. Yeah,
So that's closer to the equator.
right, and that's where it has the maximum effect. You did a volcano in Alaska, it will have a limited effect because it's such a high latitude.
Yeah, but the stratosphere, it starts at a higher altitude when you're closer to the equator, according to Dakota Gruener. But anyway, the bottom line is to get it into the stratosphere, which is where it's going to do the most effect to decrease the albedo of the planet, or increase it, whatever makes it more reflective. It does. To me, it seems like this is going to happen. Whoever does it isn't going to wait till we know the ratio, because it's going to, in order to know the ratio, you're going to need at least, you're going to, the way Paul described it. Remember in 1960, not all of you guys were around at that time. I was. Kennedy said we're going to put a man on the moon in a decade. It's the commitment to do a space mission. That kind of commitment. If some country decided we were going to find out what the science is, it would take a decade to find the right number, that 100-to-1 ratio. We'll find out whether it is, whether it's 20-to-1 or 1,000-to-1. We'll know what that number is, and I'm quite confident somebody's going to say, I don't care what it is. I'm going to save my $1 trillion investment over here.
Yeah.
Okay? Somebody's going to do it. And
I was gonna say,
if it's going to happen anyway, why do we have to lose New Orleans and all these other cities? Miami's almost toast. New York City is planning on building a wall on the southern end of the island, which is going to cost billions of dollars, quite a bit more than 1 year's cost of, comparable to 1 year cost of maintaining the stratospheric sulfur dioxide. And so,
Yeah, but people change very slowly in their thinking, especially when they're over 35. And that's why it's going to be a relatively small group of people in some equatorial country launching us sulfur dioxide to simulate a volcano and chill the earth. And you have to go far below the temperatures because you need to shock Antarctica to stop its collapse.
right.
It's in the process of collapse right now. So if you had to shock it, so you freeze the surface, you stop the melt pools, you start, the accumulation of ice on the continent, you're going to have to go down like 5 degrees. You're basically going into temperatures that they're not seen since the end of the last ice age.
So 5 degrees centigrade, it's like 8 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's going to be cold in the winter in New Orleans.
Well, if you don't do that, you're going to send a one right. You've got to freeze the poles. I mean that
That's
failing
it.
that. I mean the North Pole air mass has been totally dislocated for a month now.
Right,
I mean that is exactly what my astrophysics professor predicted. It would dislocate the poles. They would rapidly heat up, and you'd collapse the ice. And
right.
there's about a 10-year lag time between the North Pole and the South Pole, and it's been speeding up. That happens at the South Pole, you are going to collapse every single ice shelf.
Right. Well, we're not far from Arctic collapse as far as I can tell. But I'm no geologist. I think the reason why I think this is so important to ProRate is we can't do this part. We can
Yeah.
find organizations, maybe this organization that Dakota Gruener, whatever her name is again. I can pronounce it if I can see it. See, her name is Dakota Gruener. Okay. That was the last name of a rabbi we had a Sabbatillion about 30
Oh.
years ago. Anyway, that's why I think I know how to pronounce it. That's why I think so. But anyway, so
Good enough.
her organization, if she said Reflective, I think that's the name of her organization. It's a nonprofit. They're planning on doing research to confirm and validate these numbers with much smaller examples with SO2. I think we should approach them and say, you work on that part of the problem, we'll work on the other part of the problem. We're complementary. We'll help reduce the production of carbon dioxide and have everyone win. And we would like to support what you're doing to find out whether or not it could be done to save a big chunk of the planet. I think we should do that. This is what goes on in my head. I don't know. But I don't like doing these kind of, I would never do this unilaterally. Did we lose Dr. Saeed? Looks like we did.
Yeah, we did a little bit ago. Yeah, I mean, obviously, with any future projections, we'd have to look at the EV or estimated value, and we'd calculate that by looking at the
Right.
probability of the event happening, and then the expected value, and then it's the same way that oil companies decide where to drill. What's the likelihood of this working and
Right.
that working, and what's the outcome? And
I
the question
understand.
is how do you quantify the cost of, let's say, human quality of life, especially to motivate large groups where it's about preventing something now for sustainability in future generations, or a steady
Tor wants to
decline
say
in
something.
life. Yeah, Tor. Yeah.
I hear you taking the standard approach. You're going to study it. You're going to do a cost benefit analysis, and that's all I can say is I don't think that's. I think you've got a far superior one, and that is the prophetic witness to say, what is your other choice? If you're going to face a crisis, what is your other choice? And you don't really have one. I mean,
Right.
what are they going to do? Capture carbon at $100 a ton? I mean, you need to capture on the order, I forgot, 2 billion, 2 trillion tons. I mean, it was a trillion tons. And it's just like, we're going to spend $100 trillion or we're going to spend $1 trillion. I mean,
But even if you had the money, you couldn't get it out fast.
well, I mean, money is so much is tied up. If you're going to lose, what was that? How many $1 trillion in real estate in the first 10 feet?
Around 100 to 200 trillion dollars
Wow.
on the planet.
Yeah,
On the Gulf
but
Coast.
yeah, but I mean, if you just simply say we're going to simulate a volcano, I mean, gosh, um, I mean, I don't know how more simply to put it. There's lots of unknowns. People are going to freak out. People are going to complain. How dare you make the world colder? I mean, there's a lot of people who love it. It's warmer. But you're right. If you're going to save New Orleans and save all that real estate and save all these other things, you don't really have a choice.
Yeah. So
Well,
speaking
I
of the
have to tell you,
1960s,
before I saw this video, I didn't think there was any choice. Okay. Now there is a choice. It's certainly not the choice you can make in totally without conscious concern about being good. Okay. I know that in the Jewish religion, you save one life, you save the whole planet. That's the attitude of the religion. You cannot trade one life for another. It's just not okay. So you're not going to get there with Judaism. I don't think you're going to get there with any of the other religions. This is a ethic that is not in a religious context. What do you think about that, Brendan?
Well, I mean, there's dozens and dozens of ethical theories. My interest is, well, what I'm interested in is basically applying all the various ethical theories to this problem and seeing if it can be informative. That this is in terms of environmental engineering and applied ethics problem. So if we just stay purely theoretical, we're not going to get there. I would look at maybe similar cases besides this where similar sorts of decisions had to be made.
I mean, isn't it like medical ethics when someone maybe is going to die or the baby's going to die if the mother dies or all kinds of those kinds of things, right?
Yeah, and usually it's well, I mean, Hippocrates, who we now have the Hippocratic Oath that all physicians have to take when entering the medical field. I think all medical professions, and says do no harm. So there's the utilitarian influence on it. But Kantianism and deontology or duty-based ethics are also sort of at the heart of medical ethics too. Rather than think of which one is important, think of them as different lenses that you can approach problems to. And it's not about necessarily them competing against each other for which one's better, but what prescription each of them give might give insight. I've come to a different idea about moral dilemmas. The fact that we admit that something's already a dilemma in terms of our blaming practice. If the question is whether we're going to blame nations or groups to participate in its action, or not have to compensate those that they affect that aren't a part of it, right? So if it ends up, in the same way, if a company pollutes the water that then affects a community downstream, that's one question. That's more of a political question. But in terms of the moral permissibility of it, I think coming to a well-reasoned decision just requires looking at a lot of different theories together and weighing the best reasons for trying some things over another, and maybe getting consent of those that it most directly affects or some compensation for them. But yeah, I mean, like anything, you have to take into account the people now that it affects and people maybe future.
Maybe what you could do is say, okay, if we think it's going to cost, we just $20 billion to get it up there and maybe $5 billion to keep it there. And that's for 100 years, that's on the order of $2 trillion. So that's what it's going to cost. All right, then we put another $2 trillion in a fund to help ameliorate the unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's excellent. A lot of project plans don't think about that sustainability portion of ongoing. They think about what does it take to get the solution out there, but you need a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year, et cetera plan.
You can't waste. A lot of the planet cannot wait 5 or 10 years.
Well, no, I know, but when we implement it now, let's say we have to now project out 5, 20 years of how we're going to sustain the solution. And so I'm just going to be a one-off thing for 1 year.
Dave, are you in this enough to make a comment? Would you mind saying something?
Yeah, I'm having a tough time talking, but I want to read you something. High-altitude balloons can carry canisters of SO2 into the required height and release them remotely. Startups like Make Sunsets have already launched small-scale test balloons for this purpose.
Oh. So the prototyping stuff?
Yeah, so what we're saying is that there's some people already doing this, so they're obviously doing, and many orders of magnitude lower scale they have a discernible effect. But what I was wondering that Dave might say, as an environmentalist, you are, among us, the past chair of the Louisiana Sierra Club. How would you feel about this solution as an environmentalist?
Well, I would say we need to investigate what the possibilities are and which of them are practical in a reasonable time frame. We've made a mess in 200 years. Can we really expect to clean it up in a couple of years?
No, we can't. And there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences that are going to kill animals and plants unintentionally. But in the long term, we know that the same plants that are at risk from this have already been through hundreds of volcanoes. So they're
Right.
already adapted to this. It's probably the smallest environmental footprint because these plants are adapted to this kind of event.
Yeah, the alligators will still be here.
All right, Tor and Daniel want to say something. There's 7 minutes left.
Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
Um, I was. Let me see if I can remember what I was going to say. Thor, go ahead, and then I'll try to
Tor,
remember.
you go first. Dan's thinking about it.
Oh, but again, I think the model is if you look at alcohol policy, you try to do the least harm. People die of alcoholism all the time. So it's not you're going to stop people dying or something. That was tried in prohibition. And what you're just trading one bad for another bad. And so you look, what governments seek to do is set things up to cause the least harm. The same with driving. I see wrecks all the time, including fatal ones. Driving is dangerous, but we don't outlaw driving, so we're going to save people. So I apply that to climate change as well. It's as if you try to do the least harm, because if you don't do something, all hell's going to break loose, and billions of people face not very pretty ways of dying. I would rather that we do something that causes some hardship, but it doesn't cause well, let's just say I'm not for chaos and death.
And Dan, you want to jump in now?
Yeah. So there was a sort of a jump from what is going to be the cost financially to real estate on the coast cities, trillions of dollars, to deaths. And who's to say that we don't all just move inland and build new cities? I know it's expensive, but at least we're not messing with, the butterfly effect.
Yeah, but the interiors of continents dry out. And when I talk about sea level rise, I thought it was lunacy that my professors were talking about a foot rise per year. Now that I've seen the data and I've seen the results of the Larsen B breakup and the evidence of melt pools and the other ice shelves, I believe them. So once you get this going, you're talking about a foot rise per year.
Wow.
Hey, I'm at
Big ice can
500
move.
feet above sea level.
Yeah, I mean, big ice when it's outside its stability range. They know this from the last ice age here in the Puget Sound.
It just
Miles,
doesn't sound likely that even trying to cool the planet this way will stop that from happening.
actually, it will. It'll freeze the melt pools. That is what's going to
It
drive
won't
the
freeze
collapse.
them. It'll make them less warm.
No, they'll freeze them.
Oh no, it'll freeze them solid. But
So
that's why you have to go.
we're going from a chain reaction to freezing.
Yeah, we'll basically have to freeze the poles. That's the only way you're going to stop it.
Well,
Yeah, you
okay,
can do that.
but in order to do that, you're going to have to basically have a whole new ice age.
You're going to get close to, and I'm not saying the
Very
ice age. I'm going to
close.
say the end of the last age when
Right.
things were warming up.
Right, but it's not instantaneous.
I mean, if Indiana football's already won, then we're close to freezing
I
over
mean,
anyway.
the heat
It
just
takes you a
doesn't.
couple of years to get enough sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere, but yeah, you could do it.
A couple
It,
years,
A
all
couple
the
of
thermal
years.
mass on the planet's going to just go away.
well, I really ask, what's your
The
other
oceans
choice?
are not going to get that much colder that much faster.
Or
Well,
the
they're going to
poles
give off
are.
a lot of heat, but they won't have the sunlight going into them, warming them
Yeah.
off, and they will gradually dissipate that heat.
Yeah, it's just
I think that we know that this is a real effect. If we just think about the temperature variation from daytime to nighttime, which is 5 to 20 degrees everywhere
right.
on the planet.
except
You look at
except
what's,
no, except for 5 feet below the planet, it doesn't change.
I know that, but that's because that's averaging. But I'm talking about in the
No, no,
troposphere.
that's not averaging. That's the constant temperature of the Earth thermal mass. It's
I
not
know,
On
but
averaging.
on
the point I'm
land,
making is
yes.
that
Yeah,
if you
and in the ocean. The ocean's not changing every day and
if
night, the
you
temperature.
change
No,
the
we
amount of
changed the
sunlight
top
that's coming in,
2,000 feet has
Right.
changed. It's actually warmer.
That's not gonna freeze the poles.
No, but that's stored heat mass. Oh man, yeah, it's actually 3 degrees above Celsius, 2,000 feet down in the Pacific right now. It's scaring the hell out of the oceanographers.
Wow.
Yeah.
well, anyway,
Anyway.
we're not going to solve this problem, but I'm really glad we had this meeting because I think it definitely explains a possible way this problem could be grossly ameliorated. I like Tor's comment. We don't outlaw driving. We know people are going to die. We don't outlaw alcohol. We know people are going to die. We try to ameliorate it. And whatever we do in these situations, there's winners and losers. That's what's going to happen, and you can't figure it out. You got to do it anyway. I think that's what's going to happen. You want to say something else, Tor?
Now that's about the sum of it.
I want Myron. I sent you this paper, and you're welcome to share it with others in our group. Should numbers count? And
Why don't you take this the URL to that discussion,
yeah,
and
the URL is broken, but I have a different URL for it.
all right, we'll send that to ProRate discussion at Google Groups.
Okay,
Okay. And then
excellent.
we can get access to it.
And then I also have a joke. When you mentioned the '60s, I was thinking if if all you need is runway sounds like a less popular Beatles song, right?
All
But
you need is love.
yeah, yeah. If it was all you need is runway.
Okay, well, I believe if Elon Musk wanted to do this, he could start doing it today and get it all done by the summertime.
Oh yeah, but there'd be an outroar. He'd have to do it through some covert organization that would secretly do it, and then when the outcry, it says, "Why are you putting junk in the atmosphere?" And you know,
I know,
there's people
but
that they will complain about anything because
right.
they just don't like change.
He'll give a
They
good
don't want to
visionary
admit
speech for
there's a
it, though.
problem.
He'll give a good visionary speech.
Okay, well, I want to tell you, I thank everyone participating. I think we were able to pose the question, show the problems with the logic. And we didn't say we know the answer, but it sure looks like this is going to happen. We probably won't have anything to do with making the decision. Somebody's going to do it. Okay, good night.
Yeah, I'm coming down for
Goodbye.
French Quarter Fest.
Okay, great.
All right.
All right.
Yep, I'll be there.